Mark Carney just made one of the single dumbest political moves in modern Canadian history, and nobody in the mainstream media wants to say it plainly, so let me be the one to do it. On March 17th, right on the very last possible day before the deadline closed forever, the Carney government snuck in an application to appeal the Emergencies Act ruling to the Supreme Court of Canada. They did not do this at 9 in the morning when people were watching. They did not hold a press conference. They filed it quietly at 5 in the afternoon on a Monday, hoping Canadians were busy making dinner and not paying attention. And why would they do it that quietly if they were proud of this decision, eh? You do not hide things you are proud of. You hide things you know are wrong. So here is what this actually means for regular folks sitting at a Tim Hortons right now, trying to figure out how to pay their heating bills. Back in February of 2022, Justin Trudeau did something that no prime minister in the history of this country had ever done. He reached into the wallets and bank accounts of ordinary Canadians who had not been charged with any crime, who had not been convicted of anything, who had not even had a hearing in front of a judge, and he froze their money. Gone. Just like that. No court order, no due process, just a phone call to the banks and poof, your loonie is locked. Truckers, farmers, small business owners, people who donated $20 online because they believed in what those convoy folks were standing for. All of them woke up one morning and found out their government had decided they were enemies of the state. 2 courts looked at what Trudeau did, not 1, 2. The federal court said it was unconstitutional. The Federal Court of Appeal looked at the same evidence and said yes, completely unconstitutional. Both courts agreed that there was no threat to national security as defined under Canadian law. Both courts agreed that existing provincial and municipal laws were more than enough to handle the situation. Both courts agreed that freezing those bank accounts without judicial authorization was a violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That is the document that is supposed to protect every single Canadian from exactly this kind of government overreach. And 2 separate sets of judges, one of whom was actually appointed by the Liberals themselves, said what Trudeau did was wrong. Now here is the part where Mark Carney walks into the room and grabs the hot stove with both hands. Every single political analyst in this country, left, right, and center, expected that Carney would let this one die. And they were right to expect that. It was the obvious move. It was the smart move. Trudeau is gone. The convoy is 4 years in the rearview mirror. Carney had the perfect opportunity to walk away from one of the most embarrassing chapters in recent Canadian political history and say, look, that was then, this is now, we are moving forward. Done, finished, buried. He could have let this become a Trudeau problem, a relic of the last government, something historians argue about in university classrooms. But he did not do that. Instead, he picked up the phone, told his lawyers to file the paperwork, and planted his flag right next to Justin Trudeau in front of the whole country. The Canadian Constitution Foundation, which is one of the groups that actually fought this case and won, put it perfectly when they said that what the Trudeau government did with the Emergencies Act was wrong. And in filing for an appeal, Mark Carney is doubling down on that mistake. Those are not partisan words. That is a legal organization that went to court, made their arguments, and beat the federal government twice in a row, now saying out loud that the new prime minister is choosing to repeat history instead of learning from it. And look, some folks are going to say, well, what is Carney actually arguing here? Good question. The government's argument is that the lower courts applied the wrong legal principles, and that the Public Order Emergency Commission, which was a government-appointed inquiry back in 2023, found that invoking the Emergencies Act was reasonable. So because their own inquiry liked what they did, they think that overrides 2 actual courts of law. Think about that for a second. Buddy, a government inquiry is not a court. A government inquiry does not have the same rules of evidence. A government inquiry does not have the same burden of proof. A government inquiry is essentially a taxpayer-funded exercise where the government gets to tell its own story, in its own way, with its own framing. The Supreme Court of Canada is not going to look at that inquiry and say, oh well, if the government's own commission says it was fine, then it must have been fine. That is not how any of this works. And every single lawyer who has commented on this case publicly has pointed out that the federal government faces an incredibly high bar just to get the Supreme Court to even agree to hear the argument, because both lower courts were in complete agreement. There was no split decision. There was no disagreement between the courts on the key legal questions. That is exactly the kind of situation where the Supreme Court typically says, "We have nothing to resolve here," and turns the application down. So why is Carney doing this? That is the real question, eh? And the answer tells you everything about who this man actually is. Carney was an advisor to Trudeau. Carney wrote publicly about the Freedom Convoy and made his feelings about those protesters very clear. Carney is a World Economic Forum guy, a Davos guy, a man who has spent his career in the company of the kind of people who genuinely believe that a government should have the power to shut down a political movement by turning off its money supply. He is not appealing this because he thinks he can win. He is appealing this because he believes it. He thinks Trudeau was right. He thinks freezing the accounts of people who honked horns and waved flags was the correct thing to do. And now, with this filing, that is no longer an assumption. That is a documented, official, legal position of his government. He cannot walk it back. He cannot say he was misunderstood. He signed off on it. Pierre Poilievre said this week that when a liberal government divides people and violates their freedoms of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, it loses. And he promised that a conservative government will make sure the Emergencies Act can never again be used to silence political opposition. That is not just a line. That is a commitment to something that the last 4 years have shown us Canadians desperately need. A law with teeth that protects ordinary people from having their constitutional rights steamrolled by a prime minister who decides their protest is inconvenient. Let me put this in terms even the guy watching this from a recliner in Red Deer can appreciate. Imagine you are at a hockey game and you are cheering for the wrong team according to the ref. And the ref does not just give you a penalty. The ref calls the arena and gets your credit card frozen. And then 2 separate league commissioners review what that ref did, and both say it was completely against the rules. And then the new ref, who replaced the old one and is supposed to be different, goes to the Supreme Hockey Court and says, "Actually, the first ref was right, and we want to do it again if we need to." That is what is happening here, folks. And if you are okay with that, you need to think very hard about what kind of country you want to leave to your kids. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association won this case twice. The Canadian Constitution Foundation won this case twice. Saskatchewan and Alberta went to bat for Canadians twice. These are not fringe groups. These are the people standing between you and a government that has now told you in writing that it reserves the right to come after your bank account if you protest in a way it does not like. And with an election coming, every single Canadian voter who cares about their charter rights, every single person who ever put a bumper sticker on their truck, or signed a petition, or donated to a cause the government disagrees with, needs to remember this moment when they are standing in that voting booth. Carney could have let this go. He chose not to. And that choice just told you more about his true beliefs than any speech or campaign promise ever could. Canadians are watching, and Canadians are not forgetting.